In this gripping tale of prejudice and heroism, a black firefighter faces a serious challenge when his racist colleagues doubt his abilities. Believing he's unqualified for real trials, they assign him to mundane tasks. However, when a devastating warehouse fire breaks out, this very firefighter becomes the only one capable of saving his colleagues and overcoming the dire danger. Will he prove his worth and change the minds of those who doubted him? How will he handle the challenges presented not only by the fire, but also by the biases of those around him? Discover how the courage and determination of one person can break stereotypes and inspire change. Don't miss this dramatic and inspiring story. Subscribe to our channel to be the first to hear about new stories and enjoy even more engaging content. Your support helps us create deeper and more meaningful stories. Click the subscribe button and stay tuned. Jamal Brown gazed out of the bus window as it rumbled down the narrow, winding streets of Clearwater, a small town that seemed untouched by time. The town was picturesque, almost like a scene from an old postcard. Quaint, with neat little houses boasting white picket fences and tree-lined streets that whispered of simpler times. He could see families out on their porches, children playing in the yards, and the occasional dog chasing after a car. Clearwater had a way of looking both serene and insular, a place where everyone knew everyone, and outsiders were immediately noticeable. As the bus slowed to a stop, Jamal felt a mix of nerves and determination churning in his gut. He adjusted his duffel bag strap on his shoulder, his fingers tightening around the worn fabric, a physical manifestation of the tension he felt. This is it, he thought, inhaling deeply. A new start. He stepped off the bus, his boots hitting the cracked pavement with a solid thud. The sun beat down on him, hot and unyielding, casting long shadows on the ground. He could feel the weight of the sun's gaze, just as he could feel the weight of the eyes that turned to look at him, a stranger, a newcomer, a black man in a predominantly white town. He was used to it, but it didn't make it any easier. Jamal's thoughts drifted back to the conversation he'd had with his mother the night before he left. Her voice, warm yet firm, echoed in his mind. Jamal, remember what your granddaddy used to say. Fire don't care who you are, and neither should you. You go in there and do your job, son. Let him see who you really are. Her words were meant to comfort him, but there was a hint of concern behind them, a concern born from experience. The Clearwater fire station stood ahead of him, a sturdy brick building with large garage doors and a flagpole out front, the American flag fluttering in the light breeze. He could hear the faint sounds of chatter and the clanking of metal from inside. As he walked up to the entrance, the voices grew louder, but the moment he pushed the door open, a sudden silence fell over the room. The fire station's interior was a mix of the old and new. Plaques and photographs of past fire chiefs lined the walls, telling stories of bravery and history. There was a smell of smoke and leather, mingling with the scent of coffee that seemed to permeate every fire station. The fire trucks, polished to a bright red gleam, stood proudly in their bays, while the lockers of the firefighters were neatly arranged against the walls, each with a nameplate above it. Jamal stood for a moment in the doorway, feeling the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes on him. He could sense the scrutiny, the silent judgment, the whispers waiting to be unleashed once he turned his back. He squared his shoulders, trying to project confidence, though he felt the flutter of anxiety in his chest. A young firefighter with sandy blonde hair and a boyish grin broke the tension, stepping forward with an outstretched hand. "Hey there. You must be the new guy," he said, his voice warm and welcoming. "I'm Mike Lawson. I guess I'm not the rookie anymore, huh?" He chuckled nervously, glancing around at the others as if seeking approval. Jamal took his hand and gave it a firm shake. Jamal Brown. Nice to meet you, Mike, he replied, his voice steady but measured. He appreciated the friendly gesture, but he could sense the undercurrent of tension in the room. Mike gestured around the station, introducing a few of the firefighters by name. Some nodded politely, their smiles tight and guarded. Others merely stared, their expressions unreadable. Then, Mike's gaze landed on a burly, middle-aged man with a stern face and graying hair. Captain Bill Carpenter. The man was built like a brick wall, with a square jaw and piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through Jamal. "That's Captain Carpenter," Mike said, lowering his voice slightly. He's the boss around here." Carpenter stepped forward, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "Brown, right?" he said, his voice low and gravelly, like the rumble of distant thunder. "Transferred from the city?" Jamal nodded. "Yes, sir. Northside Station. 6 years of experience." Carpenter grunted, his eyes narrowing slightly. "We run things a little differently around here," he said slowly, his gaze unwavering. "This ain't the city. We don't need no hotshots thinking they know better than the rest of us." Jamal met his gaze, unflinching. "I'm here to learn, sir, and to do my job. I'm not here to prove anything, just to be part of the team." Carpenter's lips twitched, but it wasn't quite a smile. "We'll see about that," he muttered, turning away. "Mike, show him to his locker. And Brown, stay out of the way until you're told otherwise." Jamal's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "Yes, sir," he said quietly. He could feel the eyes of the other firefighters still on him, could hear the hushed whispers behind him as he followed Mike to the locker room. The first week passed in a blur of mundane tasks and subtle slights. Jamal tried to remain optimistic, telling himself that every new job came with an adjustment period. But as the days went by, it became increasingly clear that his adjustment was not like everyone else's. Every morning, the assignments were handed out by Captain Carpenter with a practiced indifference. "Mike, you're with Charlie on the engine today. Bill and Dave, you're on the rescue team. Jamal, you'll be on station duty. Make sure the equipment is cleaned and ready." Jamal could feel his frustration building with each passing day. He found himself scrubbing the station floors, washing the fire trucks, organizing the supply room, tasks that seemed to be beneath his level of experience. At first he tried to brush it off, thinking it was just a part of the hazing process. But when it continued, the reality set in. They weren't hazing him. They were sidelining him. One afternoon, as he was mopping the floors yet again, he overheard 2 firefighters talking in low voices around the corner. "What's the point of bringing in a city guy like him?" one muttered. "He's just gonna stir up trouble. I've seen it before." The other snorted. "Yeah, thinks he's hot stuff, doesn't he? Bet he's never faced a real fire in his life. Not like we have out here." Jamal's grip tightened on the mop handle. His mind flashed back to a 3-alarm fire he'd fought in the city, the flames roaring like a living beast, the heat so intense it felt like his skin would peel off. He had saved a family trapped on the top floor that day, but these men would never know that. They didn't care. That evening, he tried to reach out to a few of the guys in the break room. "Hey, anyone up for some extra drills tomorrow? I thought maybe we could run some hose lay exercises," he suggested, hoping to build some camaraderie. The room fell silent for a moment before one of the older firefighters, a grizzled man named Tom, chuckled. "Look at that, boys. City boy wants to show us how it's done," he said, smirking. "Thanks, but no thanks. We know what we're doing." Jamal felt his cheeks burn, a mix of embarrassment and anger boiling inside him. "I wasn't trying to," he began, but Tom cut him off. Yeah, we get it," Tom said dismissively. "Just do your job, okay?" Jamal swallowed his pride and nodded. "Sure," he said, his voice tight. He turned back to his tasks, feeling the weight of their judgment pressing down on him like a physical force. Inside, he was fuming. I'll show them, he thought. I'll show them I'm more than just a city boy. Days turned into weeks, and Jamal's situation only seemed to worsen. Every morning was the same routine. He'd arrive early, hoping for a chance to prove himself, only to be assigned to menial tasks that had nothing to do with firefighting. Station duty, Captain Carpenter would bark, as if those words were a sentence rather than an assignment. Again, Jamal asked one morning, trying to keep his tone neutral. His hands clenched slightly at his sides, his frustration barely contained. Carpenter barely glanced at him, his expression stony. "You got a problem with that, Brown?" he replied, his voice low and sharp, like a warning shot. Jamal hesitated. He knew he had to pick his battles, but it was getting harder to swallow the daily slights. "No, sir," he said finally, his voice clipped. "Just eager to get out there and be of use." Carpenter's eyes flicked up, scrutinizing Jamal as if weighing his words carefully. "You want to be useful? Then make sure those trucks are spotless. And don't forget to mop the floors again after lunch," he said, with a dismissive wave of his hand. "We don't need any distractions on the real jobs." The other firefighters snickered under their breath, their whispers like a swarm of gnats around Jamal's head. He bit back a retort and turned away, gripping his anger tightly like a live wire. He had grown up learning to choose his battles, but he was getting tired of always being the one to back down. As he moved through his tasks, scrubbing floors until his hands were raw and his back ached, he could feel the sting of humiliation burn deep in his chest. This wasn't what he signed up for. He had left the city with hopes of a fresh start, but instead he found himself in a battleground of a different kind. "They think I'm just some city boy who doesn't know a thing about hard work," he thought bitterly. "I'll show them." Jamal's exclusion became even more apparent during the station's weekly training exercises. While others were practicing advanced maneuvers, operating the hydraulic rescue tools, or participating in live burn drills, Jamal found himself relegated to sideline tasks. "Observer only," Carpenter had said the first time Jamal tried to join in a hose training drill. "I've done these drills 100 times, Jamal had argued. "I could—" "Observer only," Carpenter repeated, his tone colder and final, leaving no room for discussion. Jamal stood on the sidelines, arms crossed, watching the team go through the drills. He could see mistakes being made, small errors that could mean the difference between life and death in a real scenario. His hands itched to take the hose, to show them how it should be done. But he stayed silent. If he stepped out of line now, it would only give them more reason to doubt him. After the training, as everyone cooled down, Jamal approached Mike, the only one who seemed remotely friendly. "Hey, Mike, you think I could get a chance to run the drill next time?" he asked, trying to keep his voice light. Mike hesitated, glancing around to see if anyone was listening. "I'd like to help you out, man, but you know how it is with Carpenter. He's got his own way of doing things," he said quietly, almost apologetically. "Best to just keep your head down for now." Jamal nodded, trying to mask his disappointment. "Yeah, I get it," he muttered. "Thanks, Mike." But inside, he didn't get it. He didn't understand why he was the only one kept out of the real training, why he wasn't given a fair shot. The frustration gnawed at him like a relentless itch, making it harder and harder to keep his temper in check. The tension reached a boiling point one sweltering afternoon. Jamal was out back, cleaning equipment again, when he overheard a conversation through the open window of the break room. "Why do we even keep him around?" one of the firefighters grumbled, his voice dripping with contempt. "All he does is mop and clean. We don't need that kind of dead weight here." Another voice chimed in, this one belonging to Tom, the grizzled veteran. "He's just another diversity hire. Bet he got his job in the city the same way. You know how it is with those kinds of programs." Jamal's blood ran cold. He had heard enough veiled comments to know exactly what Tom meant. He gritted his teeth, his heart pounding in his chest. For a moment, he thought about barging in there, confronting them all. But what would it accomplish? He was outnumbered, outgunned, and deep down, he knew they'd just twist his words against him. Instead, he turned back to his work, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. The anger simmered inside him, a hot coal that wouldn't cool. "I'll prove myself," he vowed silently. "Not because I have to, but because they need to see they're wrong." The day wore on, and as evening approached, the station received a call. A big one. A fire had broken out at an old warehouse on the edge of the town. The place was known to be a maze of flammable materials and narrow passages, a death trap waiting to happen. The adrenaline in the station spiked immediately, the familiar rush that came with a major call. "All right, listen up," Carpenter barked, rallying the team. "Mike, Charlie, Tom, Dave, you're with me. Brown, stay behind and keep the station ready." Jamal's head snapped up. "Sir, I can help." "Did I stutter, Brown?" Carpenter cut him off, his eyes blazing with an authority that dared Jamal to challenge him. "I said stay here." Jamal's fists clenched at his sides, his chest tightening with a mix of fury and helplessness. "I've had enough," he thought, but he swallowed his pride yet again, nodding curtly. "Yes, sir," he muttered through gritted teeth. The rest of the team rushed out, leaving Jamal alone in the now eerily quiet station. He stood there, listening to the sirens fade into the distance, his heart pounding in his ears. He knew this was his last straw. "They don't want me out there," he thought bitterly. "But I'm not just gonna sit here and do nothing." The minutes felt like hours as Jamal stood in the empty station, the deafening silence only amplifying the turmoil in his mind. He paced back and forth, his boots echoing against the concrete floor. He could still hear the distant crackle of the radio, fragmented voices coming through the static. His colleagues were out there, inside that inferno, and here he was, stuck on station duty, treated like an outsider, a liability instead of a brother-in-arms. He slammed his fist against a metal locker, the sound reverberating through the empty space. "Damn it," he shouted, his voice cracking with frustration. He leaned his forehead against the cold metal, eyes shut tight, trying to calm the storm raging inside him. But the memories came flooding back. The times he'd been dismissed, ridiculed, the looks of disdain and distrust. Images from his childhood flashed before his eyes. His father, standing tall in his old firefighting uniform, telling young Jamal stories of bravery, of camaraderie, of risking everything for the team. "That's what it means to be a firefighter, son," he'd said. "You don't think about yourself. You think about the people counting on you." Jamal had always carried those words with him, through every training drill, every real-life fire, every narrow escape. But now, for the first time, he felt that resolve waver. "Maybe I don't belong here," he thought, the doubt seeping into his bones like a cold chill. "Maybe they'll never see me as one of their own." He thought of his mother again, her voice steady and calm whenever he called her, even when he tried to hide his frustration. "Jamal," she had said just last week, "you were born to do this. Don't let anybody tell you different. The real test ain't in what they think of you, but in what you do when the pressure's on." The pressure was on now, and he could feel it pressing down on him like the weight of the world. His breath came in shallow gasps as he fought against the fear of making the wrong choice. "If I stay here," he thought, "I'm letting them win. I'm letting them believe I'm not good enough, not brave enough. But if I go..." His heart pounded against his ribs, his mind swirling with conflicting emotions. The old warehouse fire replayed in his mind. The heat, the smoke, the screams, and the desperate need to save lives. He remembered the child's face, the fear turning to hope as he had carried her out of the flames. That moment had defined him as a firefighter, had shown him what he was truly capable of. And now, here he was, faced with a decision that could define him once again. What would my grandfather do, he wondered, thinking of the old man who had fought fires in a time when people like him weren't even welcome in most firehouses. He wouldn't back down, not for a second. Jamal's eyes snapped open, his breathing steadying as resolve flooded back into him. He knew what he had to do. To hell with orders, he muttered under his breath. I'm not going to sit here and do nothing. He moved with purpose, grabbing his gear, his hands moving with a steady confidence that surprised even him. His helmet, mask, and air tank were on in a matter of seconds, his body on autopilot. This is it, he thought. This is where I make my stand. As he climbed back into the utility truck, his heart was still pounding. But now it was with a sense of clarity, of purpose. He knew there would be consequences. Hell, he might even lose his job. But he couldn't live with himself if he let his brothers burn while he did nothing. Let's see them try to stop me now, he thought, as he turned the ignition and drove towards the fire. The drive to the warehouse was a blur of flashing lights and sirens. Jamal's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white, his mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. The warehouse loomed in the distance, a dark silhouette against the orange glow of the fire. Flames shot up into the sky, a monstrous beast roaring with fury. Smoke billowed like a storm cloud, obscuring visibility and turning the night into a wall of suffocating blackness. When Jamal arrived, the scene was as chaos incarnate. Firefighters moved in every direction, their shouts lost in the roar of the flames. He could see Captain Carpenter directing the operations, his voice cutting through the din with a commanding authority. We need more water on that side. Get those hoses set up now. Jamal's heart raced as he parked the truck and sprinted toward the scene, his gear feeling heavy and cumbersome, but somehow comforting. He could see Mike, Charlie, and the others working frantically, their faces lit by the eerie orange glow of the fire. Mike spotted him, and his eyes widened in surprise. Brown, what the hell are you doing here? Mike shouted over the noise, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. I'm here to help, Jamal shouted back, his voice firm. I'm not just going to sit on the sidelines. What do you need? Mike hesitated, glancing towards Captain Carpenter, who was now directing a new team. I don't know, man. Carpenter's not going to be happy to see you here. Doesn't matter, Jamal said, determination hardening his features. I'm not leaving until this is under control. Mike nodded, clearly impressed by Jamal's resolve. All right, follow me. We could use an extra pair of hands. Jamal joined Mike and Charlie, helping to set up a secondary water line. The heat was intense, searing his face even from a distance. He could feel the sweat pouring down his back, soaking into his gear, making it heavier with every step. The smoke was thick, making it hard to breathe, and he could hear the crackle of the flames as they devoured everything in their path. Over here, Mike shouted, pointing to a section of the building where the flames were particularly fierce. We need to get in there and cut off the fire before it spreads to the adjacent buildings. Jamal nodded, taking up position next to Mike as they began to maneuver the hose. The pressure was immense, the water flowing out in a powerful stream, hitting the flames with a satisfying hiss. Jamal could feel the heat on his skin, the intensity almost overwhelming. Every so often, a burst of flames would flare up, forcing them to pull back and regroup. He worked with a fierce determination, focused on the task at hand. His mind was a whirl of calculated movements, his body moving with the precision of practiced drills. He could see the fatigue in the faces of his fellow firefighters, the strain of the long hours and intense conditions taking its toll. But there was no time for rest, no room for error. Every second mattered, every action critical to the safety of the people and the success of the mission. As the hours passed, Jamal's stamina was pushed to its limits. The fire was relentless, a beast that seemed to grow stronger with every passing minute. But Jamal refused to give in. His focus was unyielding, his movements precise, even as exhaustion began to weigh heavily on him. Captain Carpenter, who had been monitoring the situation from a distance, finally approached Jamal and Mike. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes tired but alert. "Brown, you're holding up well," he said, his voice grudgingly respectful. "I didn't think you had it in you." Jamal met his gaze squarely, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "I'm here to do my job, sir. I'm not going to let this fire beat us." Carpenter nodded, the hint of a begrudging smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "All right. We could use more support at the north side of the building. There's a risk of the fire spreading if we don't get it under control." Jamal nodded. "I'm on it," he said, his voice resolute. He moved quickly, heading toward the north side of the warehouse. The flames were fierce, but he could see a team already working to contain them. Jamal joined them, his presence an unexpected but welcome addition. He worked alongside the other firefighters, his movements synchronized with theirs, his focus unwavering. Despite the challenges, Jamal felt a growing sense of camaraderie with his team. They were all in this together, fighting a common enemy. The barriers that had once seemed insurmountable were beginning to crumble, replaced by a shared sense of purpose and mutual respect. As the night wore on, the fire began to wane, the flames subsiding as the firefighters continued their relentless efforts. The first light of dawn began to break through the smoke, casting a pale, golden glow over the scene. Exhausted but triumphant, the team finally managed to bring the fire under control. Jamal looked around at his fellow firefighters, their faces etched with fatigue, but also with a sense of accomplishment. The warehouse was still standing, albeit heavily damaged, but the fire had been contained before it could spread further. Captain Carpenter approached Jamal, his expression one of genuine respect. "Good work tonight, Brown. You proved yourself out there. You've earned your place on this team." Jamal nodded, a mix of relief and pride flooding through him. "Thank you, sir," he said, his voice steady. "I just did what needed to be done." As the team began to clean up and prepare for the return to the station, Jamal felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had faced his challenges head-on, overcome the doubts and prejudices, and proved himself not just to his colleagues, but to himself. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time since arriving in Clearwater, Jamal felt like he truly belonged. The days following the warehouse fire were a whirlwind of activity. Jamal was inundated with the congratulations and thanks from his fellow firefighters. The respect he had earned was palpable, the atmosphere in the station significantly warmer. The change was evident. Where once he had been the outsider, now he was regarded as a valuable member of the team. Captain Carpenter took Jamal aside one afternoon, his expression serious, but with a glimmer of appreciation in his eyes. "Brown, I want to apologize for how things started out," he said gruffly. "You've shown real grit and determination, and I respect that. We've got a lot to learn from each other." Jamal nodded, feeling a weight lift off his shoulders. "I appreciate that, sir. I just wanted to prove that I'm here to work just like everyone else." Carpenter clapped him on the shoulder. "Well, you've done more than that. You've earned your place here." The acknowledgement meant a great deal to Jamal, who had worked hard to overcome the prejudices and challenges he faced. He knew that respect in this line of work wasn't just given. It had to be earned through hard work, dedication, and proving yourself in the most difficult of situations. He had done that, and the validation was both gratifying and humbling. With the newfound respect came a renewed sense of camaraderie among the team. The walls that had once separated Jamal from his colleagues began to crumble, replaced by a genuine bond of teamwork and mutual support. Conversations in the break room became more inclusive, and Jamal found himself joining in with the others, sharing stories and laughter. One evening, as the team sat down for dinner together, Mike turned to Jamal with a grin. "So, how about that fire the other night? You were amazing out there. I think you've officially won the title of most badass firefighter." Jamal chuckled, feeling the warmth of the team's acceptance. "Thanks, Mike. I couldn't have done it without all of you." We really came together that night. Charlie, another firefighter who had been more reserved in the beginning, nodded in agreement. "You're right. We've got a great team here, and everyone's got each other's backs. It's good to have you with us." Jamal's heart swelled with pride and gratitude. He knew that earning respect was just the beginning, and that true success came from working together and supporting one another. The fire at the warehouse had tested him in ways he hadn't anticipated, but it had also shown him the strength and unity that could be achieved when people came together for a common cause. As he looked around at his colleagues, Jamal felt a deep sense of belonging. He knew that the road ahead would still be challenging, but he was ready to face it with the strength of his team behind him. Just as they thought they were safe, a chilling realization set in. Captain Carpenter was not with them. Jamal's heart skipped a beat as he looked around frantically. "Where's Carpenter?" he shouted, his voice rising with urgency. Dave and Tom, still reeling from their escape, looked around in confusion. "He was right behind me," Dave gasped, his face pale with fear. Without hesitating, Jamal turned back toward the burning building. "I'm going back in," he shouted, his voice barely audible over the roaring flames. "Are you crazy?" Tom wheezed. But Jamal was already moving. He knew what he had to do. He wasn't about to leave anyone behind, not even the man who had doubted him from the start. The heat hit him like a physical wall as he re-entered the warehouse, the flames now consuming everything in sight. The smoke was thicker than before, making it almost impossible to see. But Jamal pushed forward, his instincts guiding him back through the path they had taken. "Come on, Carpenter," he muttered under his breath. "Where are you?" Then he heard it, a faint cough, barely audible over the chaos. Jamal zeroed in on the sound, moving as fast as he could. He found Carpenter pinned under a fallen beam, his face pale and eyes fluttering as he struggled to stay conscious. "Hang in there, Captain," Jamal shouted, rushing to his side. "I've got you." He assessed the situation quickly. The beam was heavy, but if he could leverage it just right, he took a deep breath, braced himself, and heaved with all his strength. The beam moved, just enough for Carpenter to free his leg. "Come on, Captain," Jamal urged, pulling him up. "We're getting out of here." Carpenter, dazed and barely conscious, nodded weakly. Jamal supported him as they stumbled toward the exit, the flames licking at their heels. The building groaned, its structure failing. They were almost there. With one final burst of strength, Jamal dragged Carpenter out of the building, just as another section collapsed behind them. They both hit the ground hard, coughing and gasping for air, but they were alive. Carpenter looked up at Jamal, his eyes wide with a mix of exhaustion and something else. "Gratitude. You saved my life," he wheezed, his voice barely a whisper. Jamal nodded, still catching his breath. "That's what we do, Captain. That's what we all do." The immediate aftermath of the rescue was a blur of activity. EMTs swarmed around them, checking vitals, administering oxygen, and assessing injuries. The other firefighters, who had made it out safely, gathered nearby, their faces a mixture of shock, relief, and, for some, shame. Mike approached Jamal, his expression a mix of awe and guilt. "Jamal, man, I don't know what to say. You went in there, and you saved them." Jamal nodded, his face still set in a determined expression. "That's what needed to be done," he replied simply, not wanting to dwell on the heroics. "We're a team. We don't leave anyone behind." The words hit home for many. They had doubted him, ridiculed him, excluded him, but Jamal had shown them the true meaning of courage and brotherhood. Slowly, they began to realize how wrong they had been about him. The next day, Captain Carpenter stood in front of the team, his leg bandaged and his face still bruised from the fire. The usual sternness in his expression was replaced by something softer, something that spoke of humility. "I want to say something," he began, his voice rough but steady. "Yesterday, we faced one hell of a fire. We went in there thinking we had everything under control, and it turned out we didn't. But one man stepped up when things were at their worst. That man is Jamal Brown." There was a murmur among the firefighters, their eyes shifting towards Jamal. He stood there, his posture straight but his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't done it for recognition, but hearing the words from Carpenter felt like a weight lifting off his shoulders. Carpenter continued, "I've been hard on him, harder than I should have been, and I was wrong. Brown saved my life, saved Tom, and saved Dave. He risked everything, not for glory, but because that's what being a firefighter means. I owe him my life, and I think we all owe him a hell of a lot more than that." There was a pause, and then, one by one, the firefighters began to clap. It started slowly, hesitantly, but quickly grew into a full round of applause. Jamal looked around, his heart swelling with a mix of emotions, relief, pride, and the beginning of acceptance. The days that followed marked a significant shift in the station's atmosphere. Where there was once division, there was now unity. The men who had once whispered behind Jamal's back now sought his input, included him in their conversations, and began to see him as a true part of the team. Training drills took on a new tone. When Jamal offered suggestions or advice, the others listened, their previous skepticism replaced with genuine respect. He was no longer just the city guy. He was a brother, a trusted comrade. Even Tom, who had been one of the most vocal critics, approached Jamal one evening. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice low and earnest. "I was wrong about you. We all were." Jamal looked him in the eyes, his own gaze steady. "Thanks, Tom," he said. "I'm just here to do my job, same as everyone else." Tom nodded, a small smile breaking through. "Yeah, but you're damn good at it." Over the next few weeks, Jamal found himself stepping into a new role at the station, not just as a firefighter, but as a leader. He wasn't officially promoted, but his actions had earned him a place of authority among his peers. When things got tough, they looked to him for guidance. When new recruits came in, they sought his mentorship. He didn't let the newfound respect get to his head. He continued to work hard, always the first to volunteer for difficult tasks, always the last to back down from a challenge. His presence became a unifying force in the station, bridging gaps that had seemed insurmountable. Jamal decided to stay in Clearwater, realizing that he had found more than just a job. He had found a purpose. The town had changed, too. The people who had once viewed him with suspicion now saw him as a hero. He'd walk down the street, and people would nod, smile, or stop to thank him for his service. The journey hadn't been easy, but he knew it was worth it. He had faced the fire in others, and in himself, and come out stronger for it. He had proven that sometimes the best way to change people's minds is not through words, but through action. Jamal's story became a testament to perseverance, courage, and the power of doing what's right, even when it's difficult. He learned that sometimes the greatest fires are not the ones outside, but the ones within. And by controlling his fire, his anger, his fear, his determination, he became the hero he was always meant to be.